I want to jump in with what
My mind's
apparently
drawing
is
blanks
the
right now.
world's worst side effects from after sun.
That is probably a good place to start, because amidst what is supposed to be a nice breakaway from content creation and the YouTube space as a whole, outside of course, this podcast, the MMA Creators podcast, I dealt with probably some of the worst pain I've ever felt in my entire life, which was a result of a reaction to some cream, which was meant to help or soothe sunburn, when in actual fact, it did 10 times the opposite. Honest to God, I'm not exaggerating when I say it was the worst pain I've ever felt in my entire life. It felt like I was being burnt alive for about an hour, and I was like screaming in pain. And I was nearly crying. Like, there was tears in my eyes just from the raw feel of the pain. Like, not even out of emotion, just that was the level I was at. And it was about 3 days total of just sort of general suffering and discomfort, which only really sort of subsided today and the back end of yesterday. But we're here, we made it through, and yeah, not the greatest sort of start to the week in the time where I'm supposed to be relaxing. Was doing anything but yeah, it could always be worse. It could always be worse.
Out of 10.
On the pain threshold, is that what you're? Honestly,
Scale,
for me, out of anything I've ever experienced, a 10. Honestly, I've never felt
Really?
anything worse in my life. No, I'm serious. Honestly, yeah.
Prior to that,
I
what
sort of
was the
probably.
highest?
Oh mate, I don't know. I'm not really someone that gets into those situations. Like, I'm gonna touch wood when I say this, because I've never broken a bone. I've never dealt with like serious injury. I mean, I had a major concussion like once when I was younger, which was really bad. But I wouldn't say that was like pain threshold. You know, it wasn't something that sort of struck that sort of nerve. So I haven't really got much to compare it to. But I can say it hurt like a motherfucker.
Why did it burn so much?
I wish I knew, mate. I wish I knew. I have no idea. I'm not. Maybe it wasn't even an allergy thing. I read something about after sun can make it worse. I don't think it's supposed to make it that bad, and I don't think sunburn is meant to be that bad either. So it must have been some sort of reaction to something, some chemical, some ingredient. I do not know, but I'm never touching that bottle ever again with my life. Awful.
Usually people say it about alcohol. Yours is ginger person saying it about after sun. I'll never touch the bottle again.
Yeah. It was not the most pleasant experience, but you know, I wouldn't say it's dampened what has otherwise been a really nice time away. I know we touched on it briefly in our 310 predictions podcast and the sort of half scrapped one we did before that. But yeah, it's been a pretty nice trip away. Got another 6 days or so. That's a sort of question mark there. I'm not entirely sure.
Nice.
But yeah, just spending it relaxing. Did some snorkeling the other day, which was great. Seen some fish, as you do, doing those things.
Very
yeah,
insightful.
it's fun. Just a lot of time. Yeah, very insightful. But if on like a sort of deeper level, it's kind of weird because I'm sort of forcing my brain to disconnect from a sort of working mindset entirely, almost outside of course, the pod, of course. So it's a tricky thing to do. I mean, you'll know. I mean, every time I ask you about when you're away or you're sort of changing your schedule, even in the slightest, to strip back a little bit, you're still working in some capacity. And, you know, I'm obviously wired that way as well. And it is really difficult to sort of disconnect yourself near enough entirely from that mindset and from those actions, which you're so used to doing and we've been programmed to over the last 2 years or 3 years for you. So definitely been a weird experience in that regard. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's the easiest nor the most pleasant, because there's just that part of me innately which wants to get back on the grind and wants to get back and do these things and start pumping out content or thinking of new ideas to create, especially after I've just had a video which has, you know, blown a lot of my recent work out of the water in a metric, purely on a metrics point of view. So that almost leaves me sort of clawing, saying, oh, I want to capitalize on that. I want to do more. So it's made that sort of all the more harder to disconnect. But I think I've done a pretty good job, and it's a necessary thing to do as well. I spoke so many times before about feeling burnt out and needing to just reset a little bit for a sustained period. So this is the time to do that. So it will be worth it in the long run.
Couple of questions. First one, you just got back from dinner. What did you have for dinner?
A pretty basic stuff. I had like a sort of chicken wrap. I know that sounds sort of not Thai at all, but it was really nice, really nice. And then I had a not today, but yesterday I had a pad Thai for probably the millionth time. But they just, you can't go wrong.
They are
You really
good.
can't go wrong. They are exceptional. I have
They
to
are
say,
good.
they are exceptional out here. I've had far too many pad Thais and green curries as well to boot. But yeah, it's been good.
didn't have any pad Thai when I went to Thailand the first time because I'm not a massive fan of that type of noodles. I prefer an egg noodles
get that.
personally. I'm not a
Yeah.
massive fan of the flat noodles.
I'm indifferent, but
you know what it was?
no, I agree.
One
I prefer the other.
time I went a bit too heavy on the flat noodles, and they're quite phlegmy in the texture, and I'm not a fan of that at all. But how was your Muay Thai session the other day? Because we haven't spoken.
Oh, mate. Yeah, it was almost annoying because, I mean, UFC 310, which we can sort of gloss through in a minute, it ended up having to be a bit of a sacrifice for me because I ended up missing out, at least having to go and watch back Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Gary, and I just made it back in time before the main event. And I missed Garn Volkov too. But in terms of the session itself, listen, I'm someone who obviously haven't trained in 2 weeks in terms of jiu-jitsu, so I'm going to be a little bit out of it, but in terms of my fitness, not peak. But man, I still underestimated how tiring it would be just hitting pads and doing sort of going through the motions, because that's really what the session was. I did it with my brother, a 2-to-1 private, and yeah, it was intense. Sort of did sort of the gauntlet of learning each move: elbow, knee, body kick, 1-2, of course, as well, left hook, right hook, that sort of stuff. And then sort of did a in the ring sort of, obviously it wasn't a spar, but with the pads. Around. Yeah, move around with the pads, sort of gauntlet of putting it all together essentially as the final sort of 10-15 minutes. And yeah, that was really tiring. Really tiring. And that was my first experience doing any sort of striking at all in a sort of actually learning a martial art, striking art ever. So that was a fun experience, a new challenge for me, of course. You know, being so dedicated to jiu-jitsu and the grappling art. Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. Struggled with the body kicks, which I knew I would, because I just...
Why?
I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like the rotation, or I couldn't really get my leg high enough or get the sort of rotation of the kick right.
The hips,
at least at first glance. Yeah, it's difficult. But I felt like I was pretty good with the elbows, the sort of step in elbows. I was getting a good crack on the pads with those. So, you know, sort of ups and downs. But I expected that. You know, I knew that going in. I knew I was going to suck. And I knew any sort of technique I learned would go out the window the moment I started to feel fatigued, which it absolutely did. The state of my 1-2s at the back end of that session were horrendous, to say the least.
Did you film
it was fun, really fun. No, I wish I could. I wish I did rather. And I know you said I didn't, and I realized afterwards.
I reminded you.
I know, and honestly, it would have been. I say it would have been horrendous to watch, but that would have been part of the appeal and why I probably would have enjoyed watching it back, because it would have been so bad in hindsight.
Sometimes when you do something for the first time, whether it be jiu-jitsu, whether it be Muay Thai, whatever it may be, you don't quite enjoy it because you're so bad, right? There's not a lot of enjoyment.
There is an element of that.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I don't think I had the same sort of instant connection I did with jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So I went into it with a completely open mind, of course. I think you have to with any sort of martial art like that when you're taking your first steps. But it's nice that I have a comparison. I have something to draw comparison to, right? Because I have experience in martial arts in a different vein. So yeah, it wasn't the same. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I probably did with my first jiu-jitsu session. So I didn't forge that instant connection. And I think you could say the same in the other direction, right? I mean, you know, as you said, jiu-jitsu's never been your favorite. You didn't feel that same sort of...
Kinda. I didn't enjoy Muay Thai really the first good few sessions, though. I didn't mind it. I didn't mind it here and there, but I didn't love it. But you have to get a little bit more skilled sometimes at something to enjoy it a little bit more. Or at least I did with that. I think when I first started, I didn't hate it, but I didn't quite fall in love with it. Sometimes people go and have their first session and they absolutely fall in love. I did not. I've never had that with jiu-jitsu. I honestly couldn't be further from that. To be honest, I'll tell you how I like jiu-jitsu. I have a very certain time that I enjoy it. For example, in fight week in Macau, my friends were there. I mentioned to you before that 2 of my friends from home were there as well, supporting Lon, because one of them is his housemate and close friend, and the other one wanted to come for the trip as well and take some photos. So they were both there, and one of my friends loves Muay Thai, and I train with him fairly frequently. So we hit pads in the training room. And then after we did that, we did a little bit of clinch work and whatnot. And then with my friend, I did a little flow roll, of which I enjoy, right? So just
Yeah,
my
I like a
friend,
good flow roll.
someone that can sort of give me a few things, I can give them a few things. We can go a light percentage and we can sort of have a move around. I like that. I don't mind that at all. I don't like going into a cloudy, sweaty gym where everyone's rash guard is just skin tight because it's soaked to the bone, and everyone's got like matte face. You know, they've just done jiu-jitsu for 20 years and their face is all like messed up
Playing slip
because
and
of
slide
it.
on the mat.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't find any of that enjoyable whatsoever. And then someone's setting up a head and arm and they're just crushing your shoulder, and and I don't want to be a little bitch.
There are times I feel
So I
like that.
don't really and there's a fine balance, right? I'm not trying to have an ego and just not tap to
No,
things,
of
obviously,
course.
but I'm also trying to not be a bitch throughout it. So I'm treading that line. And
Yeah,
it's just throwing me back to when I was a kid and my brother used to suffocate me with the duvet. And I just hate it. I just hate it. It's trauma. That's really what it
I
is.
can sort of relate to that. Well, both actually. I mean, both the displeasure for some elements of jiu-jitsu, but also being suffocated with the duvet. I think I can draw some comparisons there.
He
But
used to sit
I
in full
mean, for
mount.
me, there are
Sorry to
times like
cut
that.
you off. He used to sit in full mount,
Yeah.
suffocate me with a duvet, and then just hit me through the duvet. And I'd say, "Get off, I can't breathe." And he'd say, "You
Yeah.
can't breathe because you're talking."
Yeah.
And that used to be the trump card. So it was just horrible. I hated it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing worse than that is for me in a more recent memory is dealing with someone who's got 15 kg odd on you and they got you in knee on belly, and you want to talk about not being able to breathe. That's probably the closest thing to hell on earth outside of that sunburn reaction I mentioned earlier. That's probably a close second, I have to say. There's very few
Hate
places
that.
on earth, I mean, many more I'd rather be than there. But yeah, UFC 310, we did touch on earlier. We said we would gloss through, and I know I said I missed some of the fights, but of course I did my due diligence and watched them back. And I think the most notable place to kick off with is the point of contention everybody seems to be going on about, and
Not that
everyone,
deep.
except from one person, seems to disagree with it, which is the judge, of course. Cyril Gane versus Alexander Volkov. We both got our predictions. I'm going to say right, because let's be real. We know who won the fight. I'm saying we were right because we were, regardless of what the record books stay in. What did you think of that one?
Honestly, it was late and I was super tired. It was a real struggle this last pay-per-view. So I'm sitting there with my friends as well. I'm not super zoned in. The truth of it is I'm not watching it eagle-eyed enough to say, okay, actually this exchange was that and that exchange was that.
No,
I
I
just
get you.
remember it coming towards the end of the fight. And I remember thinking, I think Volkov should get a nod, but I'm almost convinced that they're going to give it to Cyril Gane. And I wasn't shocked when he got his hand raised just because of that. And I do think Volkov won. Was it as you watched it with fresh eyes? Was it as crazy as the internet's making it out to be? I didn't think it was at the time.
It's tough. It's tough, because it's like, it's one of those things where I always say a fight can be close. It's all about how clear the rounds are to score. Even if a fight's close and the rounds are close, if it's easy to score,
Sure.
that's when I start to see problems. Right? For me, the rounds were pretty easy to score. I don't know. I mean, really, for me, you just have to look at the variation in media scores. I can't remember what the website is called, where you can see which outlet scored the fight for which people. I can never remember the name of it.
I've got to stop you on that, because you are right. You are no. Sorry, you just picked a bone.
Yeah, this is an extreme one, right? That's where I'm going with it.
You are
go.
right with that. You are right with that, and that is a fair metric to sort of draw to. But I have seen some at times where I think none of you know how to score a fight. None of you know how to score a fight. Honestly, I do believe that. And I'm not saying I'm incredible at it, but I've seen some before where I think, oh, you actually don't have much of a clue. So I've seen ones where they've all been for one person and the fight's gone the other way, and I thought it was the other way. And I've watched it again and thought,
yeah, there was one you were saying that was like a few months ago.
Maybe.
No, it wasn't that. It was more recent than that, because I remember us talking about it. Yeah, and you were definitely in the minority, and I wish I remember what the fight was. But you were adamant on the scoring for a certain fighter. What about which one?
I was technically right, but last time
you really want to go there?
No, I mean, they got it right. They got their hand raised, and they gave the rounds of which I thought were the rounds. But the truth of it is, I've said a million times, I'll say it again, I'll throw it back to you. It's hard to judge ringside. I'm not excusing this woman. Yes. She seems to be a problem for the last 30 years. I saw a video of her in black and white. It was Volkov in black and white in Russia somewhere, and she was scoring it. And I was thinking, how can you be doing it this long and still be so bad? But yeah, I don't know about the media members, but going back to what you were saying, sorry.
No, I mean, there's not really much to say on it, really, because I've said pretty much word for word on here before many months ago that, robbery talk and things like that, it's a common debate, and we're inevitably going to be bringing up the same conversations probably in a couple of months' time when we see another terrible decision, and there's not much we can do, nor the UFC, I suppose, to actually sort that sort of things out. So just moving on, really, another decision which some people were contesting was Gary versus Shavkat Rakhmonov, which was a fight, was never the fight we were meant to get, but I'm glad we did. I have to say, pretty entertaining. And again, we both did. Well, I mean, in terms of, I'm glad that Ian Gary, the way I'm looking at it is, I'm glad Ian Gary's kind of getting the flowers he always really deserved in terms of, from a fighting perspective, right? We both have our problems with Gary in terms of his personality and the things he said, in terms of his confidence. And I think back to whenever his last outing was, saying he had the best calf kicks, better than Alex Pereira, in his post-fight press conference. I do remember you picking up on that.
That's a bit rascal.
That is a bit rascal. Yeah. So, but again, you need that kind of persona, right? Because that's, I'm remembering that specific thing he's saying, and any publicity is good publicity in this game. So I can't really fault the man. But from a purely fighting perspective, I think that performance sort of showed he belongs at the top, or at least I think it just vindicated him a little bit. There was that moment in the 5th round with the rear naked choke. Of course, that's the highlight of the fighting everyone's talking about, that made Shavkat seem mortal, perhaps for the first time, outside maybe a nice Jeff Neal right hand. But listen, it was good performance from both guys, and it's one of those where no stock was really lost for Ian, I'd say.
No, it rose, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
I think if anyone's stock dropped a little bit, it was probably Shavkat's. Sounded like he had a MCL injury going into that, which does change things to a certain degree.
I mean, I saw that today, but I think Ian Gary actually made a pretty good point in saying that everyone goes into fights injured.
Yeah, of course.
It's not exactly the fairest of arguments to use, even after even after you're coming out with a victory or a loss.
Fight.
I know.
He won the fight, and it wasn't him that said it. It was Daniel Cormier.
Yes, that's true.
You have to factor that into what you saw, right? I'm not saying that means Ian Gary's a bad fighter. Not at all. He fought fantastically. I actually edged him towards the fight to get the win. So I was wrong on that. However, you do have to factor into a certain... If a fighter has one knee and they're going against the best in the world and they go 5 rounds and they're grappling and striking and grappling and striking, you have to paint somewhat of a picture for Shavkat and understand. Firstly, he's got to get healthy. He seems to always have injuries. He had injury against Wonderboy. I think he broke his foot or something like that. Then he was
How
out
little he
injured
fights as well. It's weird, isn't it? I mean, I guess
Well, I
that's
think
why, right?
that's why. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of why. But sometimes you can just be unlucky in this game, and training camps are long, and there's a lot of rounds, and flipping wrestling is one of the worst. And then you have jiu-jitsu where you're wrestling jiu-jitsu as well, and then striking to go along with that. So there's so many opportunities to get injured along the way. It's not easy. I think one of the names or one of the performances that sort of stood off the card for me was Hu Choi. He looked unbelievable.
Oh, mate, he looked unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable.
You forget he's been in the UFC. How long has he been in the UFC now? It's over 10 years, right?
2014.
Yeah, mate, he looked like a sort of hot new prospect you see on a ones to watch list, right?
Yeah,
what
true.
on earth? I don't know what him and his team have done. Or has he changed camps? Is there something I've missed? You might know more than me. But mate, he looked. I'm screw it. I'm gonna be hyperbolic. He looked championship level with some of that striking. Honestly, he did. He looked unbelievably good in there. I'm saying it. He looked, well, yeah, maybe I'm exaggerating. I don't care. I'm doing it for fun.
I don't know. You're not crazy. The boxing was lovely.
He looked great. The boxing was unreal.
The boxing was lovely.
Yeah, and he was mixing it up beautifully as well. You know, really looked like a complete mixed martial artist. I think the only thing question mark wise is there wasn't much being thrown back his way, which I think maybe in the past as well we've seen him falter a bit, is when he faces some heavy adversity, he's unable to sort of weather that storm and come out on the other side the victor, you know. Nate Landwehr, as much as we love him, I think everybody loves him, you know, Nate the Train, he didn't really show much in terms of offense. And I guess that's a point in favor of Choi in a lot of ways, because he just had nothing he couldn't deal with him at all. Right? I mean, did he get performance of the night bonus? I hope he did, because it was definitely deserved. Looked really good in there, and also it's a good opportunity for him to steal some thunder from a fan favorite. So top 15 maybe for him. I know John Anik was calling for it right at the end of that fight, so I'm there for it. Why not?
I don't know about Bryce Mitchell. He did call out, but that is quite high. That was come on.
What's that doing, bro? I mean, we knew what we were getting with it, and it's exactly what we got, and everyone groaned anyway.
What are we doing here?
It's even more frustrating when Aljamain Sterling versus Mobzo Evloev was actually one of the most entertaining fights on the whole night. And yet it sat rotting in the prelims, which is such a shame, because we saw some of the most high-level MMA grappling I've seen in years. You know, a lot of times you see when guys who are so well versed in those respective disciplines, it ends up being a striking match.
Yeah, true.
Versus
I
Covington
did say that
as probably the best example of that, right? That's what we thought was probably going to happen.
Yeah.
But we really did get what I guess we didn't expect, right? And it ended up being probably the best outcome as a result. You know, it proved, a lot of people seem to forget that, or have this sort of stigma around grappling as being the most boring part of the game. And I think in a lot of instances it can be to watch. But I think those two men that night really disproved that theory, because some of the sort of transitions, reversals, sweeps, I mean, takedowns, everything in those sequences was so high level. What's that?
I've got it. I'm sitting there thinking, I was about to throw the question to you. I'll give you 30 seconds, and if you don't come up with the same answer, I'm going to spit it at you, because I've got a good one. I was going to say, what does Aldo do next, right? Because he was somewhat thinking of retiring. You have to remember, he's 35. He doesn't really want to climb the ladder again. I don't think he will retire, because he's still relatively healthy.
Yeah, I don't think so.
He's got 1 or 2 left. He's not got a lot left. He really doesn't. He does have some injuries. Who should he fight next? Because I think I've got the perfect answer.
I have an answer. I'll give you the first name that came to my mind. And the one I think that makes the most sense, if you look at the guy I'm thinking of, his trajectory in my eyes, perhaps along a similar vein, a man like Brian Ortega would be my shout. And you're nodding in your head, so I'm assuming we're on the same wavelength here.
Best matchup to make. 100%. I've been saying that for a long time. I think they should have actually maybe made it before they made this one. But I think the timelines were just a bit jumpy. And talking about timelines and talking about moving weight classes when you talk about Aljamain Sterling.
Oh, I know where you're going. I know right where you're going.
What are your thoughts on Ilia Topuria potentially vacating the belt 145 and going to 155 indefinitely? That'll clear up, because a lot of people are saying too many champions are quick to go to a different weight class, but that's not what we're talking about here. That isn't what's in question, because that argument is fair when someone is trying to hold up a division and fight between both. But he's not saying that. He's actually saying, I'm done with 145. 155 from here on out, and I'm only fighting until I'm 30 years of age, which is super impressive. What do you reckon about that?
I mean, yeah, that was the point I was going to make with, because when I woke up and saw that news, I was surprised, but probably less so if I didn't, we knew going in, we knew years ago before Topuria won the featherweight strap that he said many times he didn't want to be in this game for a long period of time. He didn't want to overstay his welcome. He wanted to get in, get out, do as much as he could in that time frame. And if we're talking about legacies, there's very few men or women on this planet who have been two-weight champions. And if that to him is the highest accolade he can achieve in this game, he's going to do everything he can to get it, right? So if that's his idea of success in MMA, so I can applaud the fact that if he does follow through with it, vacating the featherweight throne, then I'm all for it. As you said, as long as he's not holding up the division, I have absolutely no problems with it. And I mean, you're really telling me you don't want to see Ilia Topuria versus Charles Oliveira as the title eliminator? And then looking beyond that, Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev. I was actually talking about this matchup with my brother after I heard this news.
And he's fighting MMA.
Yeah, well, hang on a minute. John Jones, Thomas Aspinall. Let's hold our horses there.
But if you're talking numbers, globally,
you think he does more?
I don't know about pay-per-views and things of that nature, because I'm not too sure. But if you're talking online metrics across the world, I think it's Ilia Topuria Islam,
Yeah. I honestly, you're probably right. Unless Thomas knocks out John Jones, then we'd see some crazy numbers.
It's hard, right? It's close. It's close. It's not one's a landslide.
I don't know if you're going to agree with me here, but I feel like, call me a bit mental, call me a bit crazy, but I think Ilia Topuria knocks him out. I think Ilia Topuria knocks out Islam Makhachev.
That's not crazy. That's not crazy at all.
No, it's not crazy, because obviously they're both elite.
There's precedence, right?
I think he does. I think he puts him away. I really do.
I think when you talk about that matchup, everyone's mind, and I know this because I made a video on it yesterday and everyone said this in the comments, this is Khabib Conor, this is Khabib Conor. The difference with this particular matchup is, firstly, Ilia Topuria, who is Conor McGregor in this situation, has never been beaten. He's never been beaten. Islam Makhachev, who is Khabib in this situation, has been beaten. And he's not just been beaten, he's been viciously knocked out. So there's precedence, right? So he could go out there and just continue doing what he's doing and win. Islam is as good as it gets, of course. But it's easier to create the narrative when we have actually seen it in the same organization. We're not going back to 2008 in some professional Russian organization. No, there's precedence in the UFC. But you know what? I'm going to make a hot take here. I'm actually going to make a roasting take here. I think, I'm actually going to say this. Right, firstly, let me paint the picture. And just say Ilia Topuria is in the 145-pound division. He goes out there and he knocks out the greatest featherweight of all time, Alexander Volkanovski. He then rolls that forward and faces arguably top 1, 2, 3 greatest featherweights of all time in the UFC, Max Holloway. Knocks him out. Does something no one has ever done before. Moves to 155, faces Charles Oliveira, knocks Charles Oliveira out. Goes against Islam Makhachev, knocks Islam Makhachev out and gets one title defense and retires. Where does that put him in the GOAT conversation?
I mean,
hypothetically, we're talking very far down the road here.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you're talking about. I mean, to me, it depends what you value the most, right? Like to me, I value longevity a lot. I value, resume and length of resume is a big thing for me as well because it's tough to say. He's in the conversations, right? I did a GOAT list on one of my streams like not that long ago, and I realized it doesn't take a lot to really get into that top 10 conversations. It really actually doesn't. I almost sort of caught myself by surprise
Yeah, I may
with
just
some of
go
the
and do
names I
it.
was putting in there. Yeah, so he's definitely in that conversation. I don't know. We're talking on Mount Rushmore of MMA. I don't know if I could put him that high.
I've got one for you
But
though.
shoot,
Go on. Were you going to say something?
no. Go for it.
Who is the hardest matchup in the top 7 of lightweight for? Okay, Islam Makhachev statistically is the hardest matchup, right? He's pound for pound. He's the champion. Okay. Stylistically, who is the hardest matchup for Ilia Topuria? Because I think I've got one. I don't know how people are going to feel about it, to be honest, but I do believe it.
Are you going left field with it? Because I could go left field. There's a name that's sticking out to me for some strange reason.
Who?
I mean, you said top 7. I'll give you 2 names, and I don't know if either of them are in the top 7 now or anymore. But this might sound crazy, but Rafael Fiziev and Matthias Gamrot.
Yes. Not
those
Gamrot
2.
necessarily. Not necessarily Gamrot.
Fiziev more so.
Fiziev.
Yeah,
yes.
Man.
I think Rafael Fiziev could be stylistically the hardest matchup for Ilia Topuria at 155 pounds. Stylistically. I'm not saying that it would be a harder fight. I'm not saying that Islam wouldn't be a difficult fight. I'm just saying if you're going to take style A and style B, I think that's the hardest for him. You look at someone like Fiziev, right? I believe he has 90% takedown defense. Very, very hard to take that man down. Very hard. Extremely strong hips, very quick reactions. And lastly, it's just hard to actually get there because you have to cross his striking. And that's like walking through a sort of swamp of alligators. It really
honestly,
is
he's probably my favorite striker to watch.
You've been in Thailand for
some
2
of the
weeks.
Combinations he
look
throws.
at you now.
Yeah.
One Muay Thai session. Is my favorite. No, but it gets like that. Once you start learning the sport a little bit more, once you start not even learning it, but just appreciating it a touch more, you start realizing how good he is. And then you look at him.
Yeah.
The only thing that I'm not taking anything away from Justin Gaethje because it was a good performance, but Fiziev lost that fight. I don't think Justin Gaethje won that fight. If you get what I'm saying by that.
Yeah.
I feel like it was Fiziev's to lose.
To win. When I was there in person, I thought he won the fight, Fiziev, personally.
It was close. It was
a very close fight. Yeah. And there's no shame in losing to a man like Justin Gaethje. Like, no. Let's be honest, the man brings violence. There's no shame in that. But again, the question mark with him is around the injury and how he's coming back from that because it has been a while out of the game for him. But yeah, I would love that fight. It's probably something we won't see. I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that we do.
No.
Who knows? I mean, if we want to circle back to the Makhachev fight and the potential of that, this is speaking in pure hypotheticals here, obviously. I think the big question mark is around that high kick. Same way he caught Volkanovski, same way we've seen Ilia Topuria get clipped a couple times in his career now with the high kick. Yeah, twice now it is. So that's going to be the story of that fight should it ever come to be. So
I said that in the build up to a couple of fights because he doesn't have a lot of chinks in his armor. So
and that is one of them.
You have to go back and look. And he's, in all truth, he's probably patched that hole because he hasn't seemed to have trouble with it recently. Because the thing is with that, right, is you have to be at somewhat of a kicking range to get that going. But Ilia Topuria does such a fantastic job of backing people up and being in boxing range that it's not there a lot of the times. So if he can get Islam moving backwards, then he can do that. And some people may be thinking, oh, well, he's not going to do that against Islam. Well, Volkanovski backed Islam up because Islam is more than happy to sort of counter-strike going backwards. And to be honest, that fight against Volk really showed me how good he was at that. I didn't quite realize he was good a counter-striker moving back and moving laterally as he was. So I'm sure he'd be somewhat comfortable to do that. But the problem is against Ilia Topuria, you cannot be on the back foot. Categorically, cannot be on the back foot. If you're on the back foot, your chances of winning diminish dramatically. So, yeah, I know we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves on the hypothetical conversations of matchups.
Why
But
not? It's
definitely a
fun
fun
to
one.
it's fun to imagine. This is what it's
Well,
about. Because
let's
sometimes these
imagine.
things do happen.
True.
Sometimes they do.
True. All I was going to say is let's imagine a world in where Colby Covington is fighting a short notice fight against a top contender. What in the world took place behind the scenes to get that deal done? He must have got a
I think Dana White held him at gunpoint. I reckon.
Yeah. Got a chunky pay rise for that.
Yeah, for sure. That surprised me too. Is that this week?
Yeah,
that's this weekend, is it not? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Joaquin Buckley, we're talking about a step up for him, right? It's kind of weird. He's sort of come,
is it?
For me anyway, he's kind of come out of nowhere. Like, not him personally, but in terms of his rise to suddenly being near the top of the welterweight division, he almost feels like, I almost feel like only a year ago, I mean, maybe it was probably a little bit longer than that he got knocked out by, forgive me, I cannot remember his name, but, for good reason, because I don't think it was anyone too notable. He got knocked out cold with a high kick, just coming off of that performance against Impa. So, I don't know. I never really touted him as, it might have been. No,
it was.
I don't know. He came off multiple losses, actually. So maybe we're putting both of those together. I'm not entirely sure, but the picture I'm painting here is that I never really saw him as an elite level fighter in terms of the UFC at the top level. But here we are talking about him fighting someone who was just coming off a title shot for the welterweight throne, and should he win it, I mean, as stacked as welterweight is right now, we're talking about him in title contention with legitimate claim for the next shot, so can't let me surprised. And if we're saying youth prevails, I don't know. I think there's a good chance he wins. He wins. But Covington, man, he could remind people. But I just feel like his age might show. That's where I'm leaning towards with that one.
You said there he didn't look like an elite level fighter. Well, he was fighting UFC matchups with no gym and no training partners. He was just hitting mats on concrete in the field.
Is that true?
That's true.
Till when?
For a while.
I mean, you can see the improvement. So I'm not really surprised that you're saying that, because that Wonderboy performance, I mean, that was the one that really solidified it. Because there's a difference between beating a veteran, and being able to put them away. That's the difference, especially a guy like Wonderboy who is elusive.
No one knocks him out, really.
Unless you're Anthony Pettis, yeah, no one's knocking out Wonderboy Thompson. So doing it to a veteran is one thing. Doing it to a man like Wonderboy Thompson is most certainly another.
Harder matchup, in my opinion.
Than Covington?
Yeah, I think so.
I agree. I agree as well. I agree.
People will look at that and say, "Oh, but he'd been submitted by Shavkat." I mean, hardly a sign of crazy weakness, first and foremost. Bearing in mind, I think that was the first time he'd actually been submitted in his career, which is super impressive. But
yeah, I think it is. Yeah,
someone that specialist and someone that fast, even in that fight, Wonderboy was still fast. He was still floating backwards and stinging him with right hands. He's not going to lose any sort of speed in that striking. He's just that kind of guy. But I think that was a hard matchup for him, and he overcame that. But you look at this fight, I have heard some people say, well, this will be Colby Covington fit and not injured. What's he going to look like? He's going to look like coming forward, throwing combinations with his hands, and looking to get the takedown. And I don't mean this with any disrespect. I just mean I kind of know what his game plan is going to look like. He's not going to give you much else. I do think it's 5 rounds, right? Yeah, of course, it's the main event.
Main event.
I do think that would lean into the favour of Colby, just because of the gas tank and because he has been there and done there. been there and done it. I don't believe he's ever been to 5 rounds, has Buckley. So I give the advantage there.
That's a good point.
But if he comes out the gate hard, Buckley, I think he can put a pressure on Colby and potentially melt him early. But if he does begin to fade in the middle portion of the fight, which is possible, you're going to see Colby take over and just sort of win the last 3, probably gets hand raised on a unanimous decision.
Yeah. I'm in total agreement. And this is a sharp sort of left field turn here. But I'm glad I remember it, because this is something I wanted to bring up on the podcast, and I briefly mentioned it to you just before we recorded. There was some brainwaves going on inside the mind about just my general feelings towards the MMA space, more so specifically within the UK. And to be honest with you, I think this really is a universal outlook, I guess. For any,
I'm so excited to hear what this is.
Yeah. This is a sort of universal look, I guess, for any country that's not as developed in the world of MMA or the UFC, or is building, compared to somewhere like America or Brazil, for example. And I'm speaking from a content creation perspective, because some of you won't be familiar with this, those listening. I'm sure you will be. You know, Sky Sports, their coverage of football or soccer for the Americans, they've really changed. I don't know if you're. I'm talking about the formats here, right? Because they've really changed the game in the last couple of years with the way they've approached content creation on YouTube, and they have some really nice long form formats. Have you seen the overlap? It's that sort of thing. They get fan channels, and you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. So, but what they've started doing is doing hour-and-a-half long episodes where they bring in fan channels, or representatives of those channels, or just individuals themselves, content creators, to speak their voices and their opinions on the state of the Premier League, etc. And
on the overlap,
right? Oh yeah, on the overlap. So I mean, it's a multitude of different things as part of the overlap now. But I guess that's kind of where I'm going with, in terms of MMA coverage, particularly within the UK, is it just made me realize how far behind we are in terms of what there is to do on a pure production level. And that, when I initially thought that, I was sort of put down by it. I was like, that kind of sucks how far behind we are. But then I was like, no, there is so much opportunity. And then I was like, we are at the advent of this. We are so far. We are so adopting so early in comparison to everyone else. And I remembered that a long time ago, but then I'd almost forgotten it. So it was such a sort of nice feeling to remember again. That we are really at the start of this game within the UK MMA scene. I'll specify that there's not many of us doing it. There really isn't. So we have the jump. We have the head start on everyone.
So what are you thinking is what I'm asking.
Well, I guess I was just thinking big. It's like, why don't we do that? First, I was like, well, why aren't TNT Sports doing this? Who, of course, own the rights to the UFC, to the UFC and everything in between. Why aren't they? Will do long form content with UFC content creators, because that's the logical next step, right? Sky Sports have started doing it the last like 2-3 years, and they've reaped the rewards. So they've made.
Tell me what that looks like exactly. Let's say it's me as I sit here. What does that look like?
As a viewer, for you, what you expect?
No, not as a viewer, as in regards to what would the structure be, right? So you're saying it's the overlap, and they're bringing content creators. So let me regurgitate it back to you and then just change where I'm wrong. So the overlap is a channel on YouTube, and they have an hour-and-a-half segment once a week where it's almost like a talk show, and they'll bring in different content creators. And I'm guessing in football, they bring in an Arsenal content creator and a Tottenham content creator and a West Ham content creator. So in MMA, obviously, it's a little bit different. But let's say we bring in a content creator from Birmingham and from Manchester and whatnot, and from London, and they all come in studio and they run somewhat of a podcast, Soccer Saturday vibe.
Yeah, that's that sort of vibe. And they also bring in pros. So if we're drawing the comparisons there, at the ex-fighters, why not current fighters? Why not, right? To sort of offer their expertise and act as sort of hosts, mediators to bounce off of with the various characters and creators. So for me, that's the logical next step for TNT Sports. So that was where I was thinking. I was like, why don't they do something like that? And then I was like, we'll take it one step further. Why can't this be done independently? Why can't we get the jump, right? And obviously, maybe I'm thinking a little bit too big, but why not, right? Why not think that big, right?
Don't ever say that. Don't ever say that.
Exactly. So why not? So obviously the logistics are a thing, and there are obstacles, but it's probably not as hard as I'm initially thought to do, right? And I'm not saying one for one it has to be that, but that format.
Of course.
I mean, really, anything like that, anything along those veins, is just nothing. MMA content creation, even outside of the UK, is literally the wild west right now. It's in its infancy. It's really only really picked up ground as if individuals. And I said this like half a year ago. I said we've only really seen the initial explosion of individual content creators kick off over the last year, right? With guys like MMA Guru, who's obviously been around longer, but he's only really started to gather traction over the last year and a half, 2 years. And that's only the tip of the iceberg, right? So if you look a different niche like football or soccer. No. No, we could.
I'd have to write to him and say it'll be safe space. There'll be no living.
Yeah.
People that you've abused online.
But you, as I said, though, you draw the comparison to something like soccer or football, and you see that's a perfect example of what an end result could look like down the line. And it's like, and then you see how barren the content creation game is on a professional level. There is nothing. It's so minimal, and there is so much opportunity to be a front runner there. Like there's infinite things like that to do, right? There's so many things that have been done in other niches, which MMA is nowhere near, or UFC, particularly within the UK. America is probably a little bit ahead of that, but in the UK scene, nothing. There's nothing. There's nothing like, at the moment, it is just individuals. What's that?
We could do that easily.
Right. That's just what I'm saying. So why not, right? I mean, I'm like, the more I talk about this, the more serious I kind of feel like getting about it. Because at the moment, this was just sort of a idea that came to me and just passion, right? This is why I wanted to bring it up on the podcast so I could really flesh it out, as I'm saying. But the more I talk about it,
I think the goal with it, tell me if I'm wrong, the goal with it, you dress it up in a lot of different ways, right? I'm sure the overlap looks different to the next thing, and the next thing looks different to the next thing. But the premise is, you have essentially hosts that kind of lubricate the conversation and sort of would be us, not could be us. Would be us. I think we're perfect for that sort of thing. And plus, we've been doing this long enough where we sort of understand.
We know the game.
Yeah, we sort of understand how to direct those conversations, and I think we're quite good at that intrinsically anyway, both of us. So I think the structure of it just seems like you have a couple of hosts that flow the traffic, and then you essentially have fans in inverted comments, but more times than not, there'll be people that run their own pages. Yeah, I don't love using the word content creators because sometimes it's just a bit weak. But for all intents and purposes, yes, 100% content creators.
Sorry to cut you off. I think the only downside to something like that is there isn't the sense of, I say this about MMA in general, the one weakness to it is you don't get that same tribalism of following a team as you do with individual fights. And I guess that translates over to something like this, where you have someone representing an individual. It doesn't work the same way.
I think you're right. You're definitely right. You're definitely right in regards to, you don't have that tribalism where you'll support Chelsea and I'll support West Ham and we can go like head to head like that. And I'll be playing you next week and then maybe in the cup. You're not going to have that. It's certainly not. But you're most certainly going to have tribalism towards fighters, towards regions, towards weight classes. And to be honest, I think there's just, for example, I think you're looking at it from it could be a limitation. I'm looking at it from it actually could be a positive. Because where you get tribalism in football, you get tribalism for just one team, right? So you have Dave, who identifies with Arsenal. Arsenal Dave is always going to be Arsenal Dave. But in MMA, you have the scope to be really heavy into multiple different fighters and then maybe feel very certain ways about different fighters, or at least the trajectory of people's careers. Or maybe someone has done something completely rascal which you really disagree with. So I think there's not that traditional tribalism, but I just think it opens it up in different avenues, to be honest. I don't think it's necessarily as black and white, but I get what you mean, because it obviously makes it easier.
I think that there's positives and negatives of both. Yeah. But I really like the idea, personally. And I can tell by the way you're talking that you're on board. Shoot.
No, of course, I'm always on board for exciting ideas if I like the sound of them. And I definitely I've thought about it before, to be honest, in loose terms. I really have.
Yeah, I feel like I've always had. Yeah, I feel like we've kind of almost flirted with that idea a little bit, at least elements of it, right? But I guess that brainwave came to me. It just stood out so obvious, right? When I realized how barren the actual space is in terms of compared to other sports, or in terms of what even the actual broadcasters are doing. The TNT sports team for the UFC is tiny. It really isn't that many people.
Yeah,
right? It just proves that we're really at the advent of it. There's so much opportunity, and that excites me.
So play it out, right? Because I've got a location. I've already got a location.
How do you mean?
Well, I've got a location.
What to film?
Yeah, fantastic, perfect location.
Right. What's the next step then?
TWC HQ would be the location first and foremost.
That was my guess.
You haven't seen the new studios, have you?
I haven't.
Oh my goodness. They've just moved into the most incredible studio in London, in East London, and it is a thing of absolute beauty. It is honestly London Fields.
Oh, okay.
So prime location and a phenomenal space. Really beautiful place, exposed brick, lovely kitchen,
speaking my language.
2 levels. Yeah, no, honestly, it's a, you know what, they're quite edgy, they're quite artsy. So I'll show you some photos of it. It's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, mate, yeah.
So that's the location, right? And then you'd essentially run it as somewhat of like a talk show.
Something like that. I mean, the thing is, you can be so flexible with something like that, because
you can do whatever you want.
They also do like the Saturday social stuff. I don't know if you've seen that with what they do with football.
No, I've honestly not seen vein. I don't follow any football at the moment.
Yeah, it's more.
Just have a look at the
formats they do, right? So they do they're on a smaller scale. They'll have 2 hosts, and then they'll get like maybe 2 or 3 content creators. And they'll do like tier lists, ranking things in person, that sort of stuff. So content we see within the MMA niche now.
Let's do that.
Doing it in person, doing it with familiar faces. There's so much you could do with a studio. Good quality and production quality is the number one that has to be at the top. Like, it has to be.
We'll just take that to a different level, right? So it won't just be we've set up a camera and it's a podcast.
Separates you from the pack. That is what it is, really. And this, the funny thing is.
Yeah.
Before I even started YouTube, right? So my initial idea was, True Geordie. Obviously, we spoke to Gio on the podcast, obviously, a while back, and talking about him. He was talking about working on his studio at the time, and I don't know if I actually mentioned this to you, but the first time I even reached out to him, this was before I even started YouTube, was just asking, or even just talking and developing the idea of. True Geordie did the pain game. He still does it now, but he sort of moved away from MMA. So the live shows he does with the kickoff, where there's a bunch of content creators around a table and they do like a watch long thing. That's still popular now, right? He sort of birthed that format, and he did do it with the time with MMA, and then he moved away from it. So that was when I was initially reaching out to Gio. I was like kind of asking him what happened to that and potentially reviving it, or like that was my idea. I was like, why aren't people doing this? And
doing what?
Doing the kickoff, sort of translating the kickoff to MMA.
I don't know what that is.
And obviously that's been done now to an extent. It's like a live watch along thing with content creators. You have like 4 people around a table,
right,
watching at the same time. Yeah.
Watch along.
So I'd almost had these. So what we said about earlier about almost sort of flirting with these ideas a while back. I always had that in the back of my mind, and I guess now this is the next evolution of that. Now it's come to the forefront, and I think I just need to write a lot of stuff down. But I think it's a really good idea. And if you're on board, I know you got a lot of things going on, but I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's something to explore. Yeah, I know what you're
but I like fun things.
Yeah, exactly.
And
this, don't tell me it ain't fun. You tell me you want to host something like that. That would be fun as hell.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I like to just do any. I've started thinking, how can I do the grandest ideas to start shaking things up? That's where my mind's going now.
I'm
That's
thinking
where
of what's
my mind's
exciting
going
me.
now.
What's getting me like to say yes? This is it. This is the thing. That is the thing. I'm telling you, that's the thing. And I can't remember the last time I've really felt like that about a specific idea, let alone one on this scale. So I'm excited to even entertain the idea. Just have a look at it, brainstorm a little bit. I don't know.
I've got a project now, which the sort of big project that I'm working on at the moment will hopefully be finished by January 29th. That's the sort of big thing that I'm working on and chipping away at the background. Yeah, I can take everyone through it. It's no secret. Brother. Yeah, we always drop an exclusive for the MMA Creators podcast. They actually do get some juicy scoops on it. There's a very few people that listen, but they do get some juicy scoops. Sometimes title fights, sometimes little gossip behind the scenes. Like, I drop a few little things because I know there's a few OGs, and I know that they're not going to do anything with the info. So I like to divulge. Maybe when our subscribers and viewers and listeners goes up, I'll maybe have to not disclose as many things.
Yeah, knock it back a little bit.
I sort of pull it back a little bit, but I sort of forget now that I get information which cannot actually be repeated, or it can be, but if I want to tarnish my trust in the industry, then
trust is
then no. But yeah, find out a lot of different things. I'm just not one of those people that cares to, I was the first person to drop this fight, and I was the first person to. I would rather not say anything, and people trust me enough to just tell me, and I have that information.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's what I would rather. I would rather that than be one of the people to, okay, Juliana Pena tells me this in a gym in Manchester, and I go out and tweet it to the world just to say, I was first and first rep Casuals Corner. I'm not bothered about any of that. I'm not trying to be a journalist. I know people don't mean it with any ill will, but sometimes people say journalist to me, and I'm just like, no, that isn't what I do at all. I don't, and as much of that is a sort of jokingly just dismissive and whatnot, and as much as that is somewhat trauma to my flipping teenage years in secondary school, I explain that story for a different day. But it's also, I don't want to be held to some journalistic integrity because that's not what I'm trying to do. And it's not just to give myself the easy ride of, well, I don't have to play by any rules because I'm not a journalist, but I'm not trying to be that. I'm not trying to be completely impartial to everything. I'm not trying. And also, yes, like it is that as well. It's trying to be a little bit bigger than just going beyond reporting the news. And a lot of the stuff I do isn't always reporting. It's more commentary. But going back to the project, what time are we on? How long have we been running?
I mean, we've been running for about an hour now. Literally, we're over the hour mark.
All right, so I'll wrap up on this then. So the project is essentially, obviously, I've got the casuals clothing, and I like to try and do a piece whenever I work on a big project, or if I go traveling somewhere specifically, I like to try and create a piece which ties into that. And I'd wanted to work with an athlete at some point to do a collaboration piece, but I didn't just want it to be anyone, and I was sort of waiting for the right project and the right time and the right sort of image and whatnot. You've probably seen Full Violence do it a lot at the moment, but as much as I like Full Violence and I massively respect what they're doing, I wouldn't quite go about it in the same style. I don't massively love the clothing, first and foremost. It's a little bit sort of merch vibes, printed tee.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I don't love it. It's not me, but I do like what they're doing, and I do take a lot of inspo from those guys. So it's no shade at all. But essentially what I'm doing is when I was out in Macau, Lon kept saying to me, when can I get one of these vests? When can I get one of these vests? And I said, you know what? We'll do a collaboration piece and we'll do it tied into the fight week and into the trip to Macau. So he actually, after his win, he got a new tattoo. and it's Japanese themed and it's cherry blossom themed. And he never goes into the meaning of his tattoos because apparently they're quite sacred to him. So he keeps them quite secretive. So he has the dragon on his arm, and he also has the cherry blossom on his shoulder as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm in the middle of creating a Macau Chinese cherry blossom themed jersey with NSO, which is obviously his tagline, which is ninja shit only. So it's like an NSO casuals clothing sort of collaboration.
NSO X CC.
Exactly. And as anyone will know, every time that I go to a big project or I do something quite big, I like to try and create a casuals comic on it as well, so I can document the journey and the brand. So my plan was always to do that with Macau and Hong Kong anyway. And so what I'm doing is I'm tying it in with the clothing. So now I'm going to create the comic on Lon on his journey today. And then with all of the content in the comic, be different pieces from Macau, from Hong Kong. And then also on the back end of that, I've got a very sort of elaborate plan with the content and how I'm going to sort of create different pieces. Some long form, some short form, but just vertical creative, horizontal creative pieces, some photography. I've got all the right people in the right spots to help me with this project. So it's just about bringing it together. And then I'm going to release it on Chinese New Year, which is the 29th of January. Yeah, which is the 29th of January. So that's the plan. Jersey, comic, content plan, 29th, and absolutely smash the content to the moon and back, and really play into the Chinese clientele as well, because it's a massive market.
Yes, very good point, actually.
Massive market. So I'm leaning into that heavy with the language I'm using. I'm leaning into that heavy with the designs. Even the fact, the details, I always like to think about the details at every level, but even the small details, like the number I'm using in Mandarin is the number 8. But the number 8 in Chinese, or in China, sorry, is symbolic of prosperity and health. And it was also Lon's 8th win in China. So it just ties very perfectly together on just a lot of different fronts. So yeah, it's just about execution now. But yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Well, color me excited. That sounds sick. I want to see. I mean, are you going to do a sketch beforehand? I know you did that. You tend to do that, right?
Yeah, I'm on the mood boards at the moment. So I'm just working through the mood boards of everything. And I'm just building it into the final design. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll have the final design by the end of this weekend. And then in regards to the comic, I should start having the sketches over the next sort of couple of weeks. But it's going to be a push because I'm trying to get this all done before the sort of 29th where I can release it. And I would like to have a lot of the content done before that. So in regards to the content, just a quick one and then we'll wrap up. But in regards to the content, I wanted to do a Food Fighters episode anyway. So I want to do a Food Fighters episode, Chinese inspired, right? So we'll create a few Chinese dishes, use that as a sort of long form piece to sort of just use as content generation, have the jerseys on in there, have the short form, just more my vibe, have one of my friends who does a lot more of the sort of cinematic sort of music production videos, have him in there. I've got a friend that does mixed media that I want him to be involved on that and help doing the mixed media for the storytelling. I'll put that into video form. And then I've got a friend who's like one of the best sort of hip hop, street photography, those sort of vibes. He's the best in the world at that. So I'm bringing all of the arsenal together and sort of gonna absolutely smash it. Yeah.
That's going to be sick. I think that's probably a little good place to wrap it up on a really eventful episode of the MMA Creators podcast. I believe that is. Yeah, I said that as if that's up there isn't otherwise, which isn't true. Episode number, I think we're 82
sometimes
now.
Sometimes it's not.
Yeah, sometimes it's not, but that's MMA for you. But yeah, we will see you, hopefully, on a regularly scheduled programming next Sunday. Have a good one.